our way to Punu Kurunpa, to the east of Bemboka Peak, directly to the front, to survey the fire effect on our western area. Looking towards the Bega Valley escarpment, coming around to the area of Yankees Gap, the rocky knoll directly to the front, if you can see it with this camera, is Indian Head. It's day 38 of the Yankees Gap initiated wildfire. It's still burning. At this stage, it's burnt an estimated 18,000 hectares. We've driven east along the Snowy Mountains Highway to the area of Numbugga itself. Last Saturday experienced high northwesterly winds which caused the fire to jump the fire control lines and reignite into the grazing country of the valley. Bemboka Peak to the front, down to its east is the start of the smoke-shrouded Desert Creek catchment. The fire jumped the highway cutting it off for 24 hours at least. It also spotted through into a place known as Cooper's Gully, where it commenced to head in a southeasterly direction down Cooper's Gully towards Bega itself. The fire control officer of Bega has reported having burnt leaf matter dropping at the control station itself in Bega. This fire also got through to Desert Creek Road area and worried them. The Saturday fire burned through to those hills over there. We've had one of our larger white stringy barks drop in the wind on Saturday by the looks of things. Well, I don't understand how this has happened. We'll have a look. I understand. I did not notice that. There's so much to look at the moment. It's quite unusual the way that's burnt. Right. There wasn't much holding it, so no wonder the wind on Saturday got it. This will go on for several weeks yet. It's in fact 2 trees lost, because with the fall of this one, It snapped this other white stringy bark off as well. This sort of damage will be common to the whole area. The globe-like nuts of the white stringy bark. And as would be expected, they have shed their seed already. All of them are empty. They've all opened and dropped. But a small example of what is and will continue to be for a while, the aftermath of the Yankees Gap Wildfire. Okay, our little task today is to take a walk in to the northwestern part of the property to survey the effects of the fire on that part of Punu Kurunpa. Initially we enter into a CMA forest type of peppermint, rough-barked apple, moist open forest. The thing to note in this area is that the slender tea tree was at a late stage of its sear in the succession back to a climax forest. The black wattle, a legume, had started to grow, moving into a later sear. Black wattle, acacia being a nitrogen fixer for the soils. What happens from here, whether the slender tea tree gets a hold again or not, is not of my knowledge. So what you have here is mainly the stems into the middle horizon of slender tea tree. We'll cut across through the fire ground. Normally don't just simply walk through here, but I suspect today it'll be a clear walk all the way. One can only hope not. So we'll go at a steep tangent to the contour and work our way higher that way. We've now moved into rough-barked apple, white stringy bark, dry open forest. I've got a grey thrush that's decided to follow me here. It's just up ahead of me in the trees, keeping a close eye on things. It'll be the one that's using the little fire remnant around the hut, I suspect. It's not calling at the moment, but here we have a dead stag that's miraculously survived the fire when so many others have not. And what makes it even more amazing is that it's been white-anted right out. So why it never caught fire is beyond my reasoning. That's the nature, the indiscriminate nature of wildfire. Yet right next to it here it's taken this one out. So these places, of course, are barely recognisable. This outcrop of rock just here is in fact granodiorite, which is part of the Bega batholith. It cools slowly in underneath existing geology, has large crystals and erodes fairly regularly, as you can see with the scree there. And as said earlier in another video, thus formed the majority of the soils of the Bega Valley. I know this spot because of the rock outcrop. Down in here was an area where I used to set up a night camera to keep an eye on the wildlife of Punu Kurunpa. An example of the granodiorite breaking down with its large crystals. You can see has no inherent capacity to resist the forces that break things down. These forces that are of our nature. Okay, we've just moved across that spur line and we're now confronted with a typical re-entrant on this part of the property. Re-entrants that run up to the Merimbula Group conglomerate cliff line. And in the mosaic of plant communities on the property, it is these re-entrants that are responsible for the small little pockets of the dynamic of the vegetation types on the place. But looking from here, they look to be no more at the moment. We're now in the re-entrant we observed from the spur line. Burnt out. This here is a conglomerate boulder that's come down from the Merimbula Group cliffs above us here. It's been burnt. Oh, and if we look up here, we'll see a heavily damaged example of rock orchid, Dendrobium speciosum, I believe. And it will be a struggle for it to come back from the rhizomes, because they've been scorched very badly. But I swear there's some life still in some of them. A common sight down the re-entrant. More examples of fallen trees. No shortage of them. Halfway up, And it's starting to look like none of this western section of Punu Kurunpa, be it wet or dry, forest type, has avoided the wildfire. You look at the ridges on the other side, you can see where the fire in fact crowned, so spot fires coming from the scorched ridge up there. If this camera's good enough to pick that ridge up, it's been skeletalised, and with the winds on the day, it would have spot fired straight in onto this slope, which is a dry forest type just over this spur line, on the spur line, and it would have just ignited, pre-warmed to some extent, and raced off up the hill to the conglomerate cliffs and over the top into the rest of the park. It's national park either side of us here. Punu Kurunpa is a little alcove up into it. Here we go. Wildlife been brushing under here. This is their track going through just here, if you've got an eye for it. I see no tracks, I see no scat. My guess would be redneck, swampy, or wombat. But it shows that they're transiting, and that's important. That's a chopper with a bucket going through to the fire to the north of us here. Today is categorised as high fire risk, and that last slope is proved as somewhat of a challenge to this 71-plus-year-old, I'll tell you. She keeps telling me I'm not 25 anymore. Oh well. This spur line running south to north from the Desert Creek has always interested me, for it's an occurrence of what the boffins would call silvertop ash, black she oak, shrubby forest under the CMA classification system. Interestingly, under the Janus classification, it would be classified as Wadbilliga gorge dry forest. There's not all that much silvertop ash here, it does occur. But what this would indicate to us is that the soils on this spur line are particularly poor, and the angle of topography, the nature of the broad spur line, broad for this area, has created a little niche at variance to what's around it. There's still quite a bit of the occurrence of white stringy bark and Angophora, rough-barked apple, is common to it, but The dominant species is the black she oak with the occasional silvertop ash, which is unusual in here. This realises our fears for the place with this wildfire. This reentrant here in front of us was full of ferns. Down below me there's a site where we had a quadrant, so I'll work my way down to that. The western boundary of the property is some 100 metres through to the front. But I can see that far and it's burnt, so I'll go down to the quadrant in the gully. A better view of the mountain grey gum mosaic, unrecognisable. The lower story and most of the middle story, which was vigorous to say the least, is gone. The entanglement of vines that you couldn't get through, gone. If it wasn't for the mountain grey gum there, you'd be tempted to call it all, in its broad terms, dry sclerophyll rather than wet sclerophyll. It's like a bomb's gone off in there. It's all been burnt out. The wet fern gully, the quadrant in there's gone. The little bit of remnant coastal warm temperate rainforest which is down in there has been severely damaged, in a similar state to what I found the mountain grey gum area. There's been a slight difference in the way the fire's reacted here. It's gone through, but I'd say concurrently with the wind and the firestorm itself, the destruction in there is quite bad. The upper and middle story have all been bent as though they were caught in some sort of an eddy in the opposite direction to the wind. They've all laid downslope, whereas the wind should have blown them all upslope. And it's quite a tangle. Proved too much to me. We've got a grey gum through just there. The yellow bark you can see, mountain grey gum. It's sort of the transition zone that went up into the wet sclerophyll area of the mountain grey gums. I'm down a fair way from where I filmed them a little while ago. Desert Creek's just below us. I find I'm in need of water. This is called the first peg of the glossy black transect which goes up this Wadbilliga gorge dry forest spur line with the black she oak as the dominant. The name is derived from the glossy black cockatoo, which are an endangered species, and their sole food source is related to the cones of the black she oak and other she oak. Black she oak is common, particularly through the Wadbilliga where this fire's gone. A glossy black are reliant on it. They're in here following the breeding every year in a reasonable numbers. It's always been pleasing to see them. Won't be much for them this year. They're probably going to have to go more to the coast to get tucker now, which will bring them out of the Wadbilliga into populated areas. I didn't film in there with that mess because, quite frankly, it was all I could do to get myself out of there. I was buggered. And we've got to remember it's a high fire danger day. If the wind comes up, the little stumps and root systems or what have you that are still burning could well spark up, and areas like that are just the sort of debris a spark or two would love to get into at the moment. There you go, one of the fixed aircraft water bombers. Okay, we'll go down to Desert Creek and seek a drink. We're coming through to the creek now. Under normal conditions, this is a very wet area. The current drought came in on us very quickly here. It may have been up in the northwest and up in New South Wales and up into Queensland, but it dropped in on us suddenly and severely. You can see the fire has hit Desert Creek in this area anyway. These are Numbugga or water gum, and we're in a different forest type altogether again just here, but this is also, this very spot is also the south western boundary of Punu Kurunpa. A temperate rainforest ran through just into here above us, and it of course was part of the mountain grey gum Sclerophyll system up there. I've had the infrared night cameras here, just up in there, and it's picked up some interesting species. We even were fortunate enough once to catch a glimpse of the long-footed potteroo. Goodness knows where they are at the moment. They would have had the creek for protection, but their habitat has just been ravaged in this area. We've never photographed the quoll, but we have directly sighted quoll. They were common to this area in the cliff line, but we've found their scat in here, and one of them got into the habit of showing his distaste of our presence with the construction of the hut down there, which is some 500 metres from where I am now, downstream, by dropping his scat around the entrance ways to that lot. Look at this. This lily-pilly has somehow managed to make it through without being too scorched. But the water gum or Numbugga, wow, they've been hit hard in this little area anyway. Coming down for water. Oh dear. This is a perennial stream. It is still running. The pools down further and upstream will still be sound. In this area, of course, it's normally running through here quite fast. But at the moment, it's just shallow pools. There's a steep drop off just here, and so it runs through from the pools that are further up. Those pools are just 100 metre further up. But excuse the hands while I have a drink. It still tastes like mountain juice to me. A little bit of charcoal. It's burnt straight down the slope from the hot spot there, up on the ridge line, that northern aspect, slope and ridge line, and just hit here. It would have spotted through in advance and been preheating. What I'm saying is the entire western half of Punu Kurunpa, its most valuable part, environmentally, biologically, has been burnt out. You can see by the debris there what this creek normally does during a fresh. That is a mild flood. Normally here is just, on its average, is water up to just below here, about there. You can see the watermark. I'll tell you a little yarn about this spot. I've been crossing one of the fern gullies up there. What we went through today is not what's normally there. It was fern up round your waist. And I was crossing one of those steep gullies on a log, taking a shortcut and walking across, fell off, fell down, and had a branch down there with a sharp end up into my buttocks. Went in a long way, snapped off. I was on my own, got down here, bleeding like a pig, bathed it, pulled what I thought was a stump out of my bum, and bathed it and did what I could with it before I did the 500 metres back to the hut, and I was on my own. But I came, waded down through here to do it, and remember the water's moving downstream all the time. And I got to here in the water, and I got myself up, and I was just looking over, and a dingo came up the rock here. I'm not kidding, it was a full classic dingo that you think about, a blonde dingo, and we're face to face. And we both made a mistake, and we both shit ourselves. And I jumped back down into here and hobbled away trying to get my balance. And of course it turned and hightailed it. I then realised what an opportunity I'd missed, and I jumped back up here somehow. But of course, the dingo, having made a mistake once, won't make it twice, and it was gone, never to be seen again. But back in those days, dingo were common in this area. We used to hear them at night from the hut, as they'd howl on the cliff lines. For those that don't know, dingoes don't bark. You see the size of these conglomerate boulders in the creek line here. They're a magnificent sight with the water rushing through them. Downstream from here, seems to have fared better than behind me. There's a large, very old Angophora floribunda down there to the front, if this camera can see it. The light grey bark going all the way up. It is really old. It has a massive circumference at the base, and the property is named after it. It is the spirit of the bush here. We'll rest up before going back to the hut. It's a difficult walk back along this creek line, as you can see. We'll get above it a bit and see what we can do. But as I say, the western portion of Punu Kurunpa has been burnt out. The thing to remember is that biological systems are a dynamic, subtle, ever-evolving mosaic. What we walked through today just looked like it was all the same, burnt out. The difference was the dominants that were still standing with their leaves. They're a fusion of entity. That is, of life and death. What we're seeing today up there on the western part of the property is a lot of death and harm. But these things evolve. They're a fusion, they're dynamic. And if you look at the tree that Punu Kurunpa is named after there, it was there before Captain James Cook sailed up the coast, the east coast of Australia, and started what became a series of events that has dramatically altered the ecology of this country. But still, that Angophora floribunda stands there to remind us of what might have once been. Now, it doesn't matter what we Europeans do. It's going to outlast us. The problem is, with our arrival, we virtually destroyed the environmental conditioning that first Australian dreaming, their law, L-O-R-E, evolved over some 65,000 years, we now think. Evolved a fire regime that was in tune with the environmental requirements of areas such as this. Their fire stick methods of patch burning and everything created open forest and maintained species in a balanced way. We've come in and we've stopped burning altogether or burnt too frequently, too hard, and we've changed the species patterns dramatically, and more fire-prone species have grown. That applies to Punu Kurunpa. So when it goes up now, it goes up fast and hard. We of today's generations of European Australians think this is normal, but it's not. And if you take the time to read the journals of even Cook for that matter, but Matthew Flinders, when he came into this area, he talks of the open forests and being able to pass through them. The early settlers came into this area and their cattle got fat on the legumes and grasses that grew in the open forests that the first Australians had maintained with their fire stick technology. The cattle grew fat, so they immediately started to clear all the land, change the environmental consequences and fire regimes to the areas, and we have what we have today. Good-o. As I say, if you don't understand that as a European Australian, read the journals, the diaries, the stories of the early settlers, the memoirs. It's all there. Go to the Mitchell Library. You don't even have to leave home anymore. Get on the computer. Go to the Mitchell Library and ask for it. Open country. When the first fleet sailed into Sydney Harbour, it was the same. They were confronted with open forests you could walk through. The first Australians had burnt it and maintained it. It was their way of developing their country and utilising it. It's recorded in the diaries of Philip. Some early English settlers referred to these areas around Sydney Harbour as English park-like, looking for some way to describe it with the language as they understood things at that time. We suspected that they were here in this creek, but we've never seen them ourselves. That is the platypus. But we had an officer from the Catchment Management Authority in here, and she came through on an inspection of the area, and woe behold, she saw one of the little beauties right here in this patch of water. There's no reason why they don't exist in this creek in number. But you got to be quick to see them. Oh dear. We have a kill site here. My guess is that they're feathers of a juvenile gang. That is a pure guess, but one I'm willing to make. A kill in here would be a bird of prey. We often find the snipped off tails of spiders in this area. The owls get them. We climbed up to the higher ground and worked our way down the adjacent the creek to a point where we're coming down to check on this Angophora floribunda that we refer to as Punu Kurunpa, or in the English, bush spirit. It is the bush spirit of this land currently in our care. Couldn't move through here, and there was some wonderful species associated with this little creek flat here. Wax flowers, all sorts of things. They're simply not there. They're gone. Correction. One through just there still. What comes back to a more climax expression in these areas is for the future to see. What we have in under here is a wombat hole. The fire hasn't got in there. A little bit of fresh or minor flood debris against it here, plus a fallen tree. So it was prone to catching fire. Now, you see, there's a bit of luck. Something, probably a long-nosed bandicoot or something, been scratching around in there, and it actually pulled the leaf back, and it's just mineral earth, so obviously the bark caught fire with the heat, but where it could have really got at it was mineral earth, and maybe, just maybe, that helped. That there that's all but destroyed, it looks like it might come back, was a black peppermint. Unusual for here as well. It's the only one we've found on the place. Check around this side of our Angophora. There you go, beauty. Oh dear, this was close. Yeah. Well, we can only be thankful there wasn't any more fuel there. Otherwise it may well have done harm. They are my forebears, and I have benefited from their labour. But may this tree be symbolic of sticking one right up the backside of we Europeans. Cynicism? Yeah. But I've seen a little bit too more than I would have wanted to. I'm ex-army, I've been around, and I'm a veteran of the intrigue and deceptions of the Vietnam War, and I became something I don't like. But what I've always had is a deep and abiding love of Australia and this country. And it's here I wish to die.